Hi everybody, I'm Christian Geldmacher from the Fiori makers, and together with me I have Kai Richter, Chief Designer of the SAP Fiori Design language. Kai and me just came back from the Fiori makers showcase call that we did together with Hitz Patel from Capgemini. And if you couldn't make it to this call, no problem. In this video we will present the showcase and Kai's review for you to consume anytime, anywhere. So without further ado, let's hand over to Hitch. Hitch, maybe you start introducing yourself.
Okay, so I'm Hitz Patel. I'm the head of SAP Design for Capgemini, and I'm here to talk to you about the Yorkshire Water project that we're doing for asset data system. So just a little bit about me. I work within the UI Smart team within Capgemini, and we do a lot of the work around the standard Fiori apps, the bespoke enhancement apps, and also we do a little bit around the UI5 apps. So they're totally bespoke and are not following the Fiori guidelines, but we're not going to be talking about that today. So it's more about the Fiori applications that we create. So a little bit about the team that are in Yorkshire Water. So we have the enterprise architect, who's Andrew, and he's the one that came up with the architecture behind it all. We've got a functional lead, Patrick Roberts, and a development manager. And underneath each one of them, we've got a few other people that helped us to understand a little bit more about the details in some of the parts of the application. And the development, we had UI and gateway and app developers within that team. So just a quick little brief about me. So I've got about 15 years of graphic design experience and about 10 years of user experience. So graphic design was my first initial sort of jaunt into web design at that time, and then I kind of came into user experience, and now I'm fully fledged user experience. And I guess a lot of design, I still try to keep the design in there just because I just enjoy doing it. So, and I think it works quite well with user experience and bringing that to life. So it's just a little bit about me. So the client, Yorkshire Water, so they employ over 3,000 people. They supply water to 2.3 million households and roughly about 130,000 businesses. They are currently going through a SAP implementing and refresh program, and that's where this program comes in. So they've got a lot of legacy systems that are outdated, using really bad software in the back end, and doesn't really work with the new SAP refresh onto HANA. So therefore some of these software, they just need to be developed or redesigned, but we need to work out how and why they should be redesigned. So this is a good opportunity for them to break that apart and actually work out why and how we should move forward into the future. So that's the company. So the first thing we did, and this is going straight into the discoverers phase, we looked at how might we help to redesign this software, and what was the main key element. So the how might we question here is, how might we incentivize our contract partners to provide additional data for governance and environmental commitments? So that was the ask. That was the problem they currently had, was the contract partners didn't want to give Yorkshire Water the information they needed to be able to forecast and for future projects. So that's where this actual question came from, and we were trying to address them questions while we go through the whole journey. So our design thinking delivery model, we're in the discovery phase. We then went into defining and then ideation, and then in the ideation we had like post-it notes and maybe some sketch drawings, and then we took those sketch drawings into the prototype. So we use Azure to do our wireframing, and then we took it straight to the user and evaluated it with them, creating iterations and incorporating their feedback into those designs. So that was the biggest part of the journey. So this discovery, define and ideation were done within like 3 or 4 weeks, and then a lot of the rest of the bulk of the work was done within the prototyping and the user demos. We actually probably even went into development and came back into the prototyping if something didn't work in the sprints. And there were some issues with development, we brought it back into prototyping and see what could work. So this was like the key area of our full development delivery. We then, once we're happy with our prototype and took it as far as we could, we then go into a product backlog, a sprint plan, and then sprint review, and then we break them into those sprints and have a shippable increment of those sprints. So in total in this journey we went through 6 sprints, and I'll talk to you about that at the end of the slide deck. Okay, so just a little bit of immersion zone area where we can work out actually what this means and what this means in real life. So some of the capital projects that they currently work on are laying pipes. So underground pipes is one of the biggest ones. So the other one was the treatment plant or treatment tanks. So this is where they store the water and they let the treatment tank dissolve any of the bad things in the water, and then they can ship it out to people. So that looks like this in this top right corner. So in this image we've got 2 tanks being completed or being created, sorry, and then we could also refurbish tanks, so that's part of this whole system as well. We've also got pumps in here. So one of the biggest things that happens is they refresh or replace these pumps, and this is a big cost to them, and they do this quite often. So there's always a maintenance cost for these pumps, and it's always nice to highlight that. And then we've got infrastructure, so they could be creating facilities, warehouses, etc. So they're the different types of real life scenarios that they actually go about and do. Okay, so the second stage then, so we looked at the user interview. So we tried to interview everyone that has touch points within in their legacy system. So the costing team was the first one. So they're one of the biggest users. We had Jenny from the asset accounting team. So they're mainly on the financial side and asset management. We've got 2 contract partners, the Haneen and Leo. They really helped us to understand how they use it and what they wanted out of it, what are their pain points, etc., etc. And then we've got the senior project manager. We've got another asset management who, again, doesn't use it that often. And then we were lucky enough to be able to talk to a developer of the legacy system, which gave us some insight into the problems they faced when they were originally creating this, and some of the issues we might face when we're trying to create this from a data point of view. So they were the user interviews, and they kind of helped us define personas. So we had a group of, I guess, 4 groups of people. Then we defined 4 user groups, and that helped us understand their behaviours, their goals, and pain points for each of those groups, and then we could identify how we could create the UI for them. Journey maps was a great way of understanding this in detail as well. So what we did we asked them to talk us through their day in the life of using the old system, and we captured their thoughts and feelings. We captured any opportunities that came out from those walkthroughs, and that helped us to maybe find new opportunities that we wouldn't have got from the interviews, but opportunities that we could use, like sometimes they use Excel to export data to an Excel sheet and then manipulate that data to create some kind of a graph or presentation. We could incorporate that and put that into the actual UI, and I'll show you examples of that when we go through the actual walkthrough. So once we've got the persona and journey mapping, we created our defined user group. So we had the costing and modelling team. We've got a project manager, a contract partner, and an asset accountant. So again, we asked the how might we question for each user group because we wanted to see what this meant to them. And as you can see, there's a lot of different opinions on what they wanted from the system. So the first one, the costing and modelling team, they wanted something similar to the original how might we question, which is to try to incentivize the contract partner to provide them with information. They're really lacking on doing that, and they just basically, the contract partner, if you see there how might me, I just want to get paid. I've done the work and I just want to get paid. So they don't really want to worry about adding extra information in. And then the project manager, for them, it was more to see an overview of like how the project was going through the life cycle. And so they just wanted it to be an efficient way and produce a data capture in a timely manner. We then had the asset accountant, who is really only looking about the money, and so cumulative breakdowns and costings and pain and gain costings, that kind of information was really important to the asset accountant. So we had to address or answer at least all of these for each one of these user groups. So how we did that, we went into design thinking mode, and we went into the workshops and got them to all stand up and put post-it notes about their ideas, and we tried to do some card sorting. We put some mock-up designs up onto the wall to see how the user might use this in real life. And then when we got to like the wireframing stage, we walked them through the wireframe, and they amended things on the fly, and then we could amend them in the wireframe, test them, and make sure they all work. So that was the main interactive session of the whole discovery phase. So with those images, what we did was we tried to work out what is a capital project and how does it affect and what does it do in real life for an engineer. So we've got examples of the treatment tank. So treatment tanks can either be built, refreshed, or maintained. So built from scratch. So that's one item of a capital project. You've got the pumping station. So that again could be built on its own. You've got the pumps inside the pumping station, and then you've got storage tanks. So these are some of the capital projects that are in flight at the moment. We also have things like security perimeters. So this is a good example of how we would want to know if we've built a perimeter around one site and it's cost us X amount of money, how much would it cost us to do that same perimeter security but on the double the size? So this tool will help us to be able to identify that, and then that helps us to future plan. So that's one of the reasons why we need that information from the contract partners. Okay, so a quick example of this. So an engineer would go off and do get a piece of work from Yorkshire Water to go and refresh a pump. So the engineer goes to the pumping station and starts working on the actual work that he needs to do. And what happens there is he creates work items for every piece of work that he does. So removes bolts, he would create a details area, he would create some measures, he'll add some carbon data for our environmental issues, and then we've got asset linking, which will link the piece of work that he's working on to a physical location. So within this region, within this pumping station, within this unit and this pump. So it allows us to track how much that pump is going to cost. So he carries on creating his work items, installs the pump, replaces pumps, and then they might have some indirect cost as well. So he might want to add in an indirect cost, which would be commissioning the pump, and therefore we still need details and carbon in terms of how much carbon he might have used for that particular activity, but he wouldn't need to put any measures or asset linking into it. So that's what's needed from a project. So I will now show you what that might look like in the system. So taking that real life scenario, the contract partner would get a dashboard. They would click on the ADS tile, and that will give them a overview page, which will show them all of the new items or new capital projects that have come in, what he's working on currently, and then anything that's been returned for review, outstanding, return for final invoicing. And then we've also got a flow to say what stages each part of the user journey, the actual contract, the solution is on. So submitted for review, there's 16, and it's gone to the Yorkshire Water manager, there's 24 of your own solutions. So if I go into new, you'll then see a list of the 3 contract projects that are available for them to be able to start working on. They then go into create mode, and that allows them to put in some information around their ground conditions, their extent of work, and some high-level information about the project. We can then go into work items, and this is where that example of the graphic shows where they would create a work item above ground, below ground, depending on what type of work it is. In this instance, it's an above ground one, and then they would create their details and measures in this area. They would then click on the add measures, which would pop up a little dialog box, which will allow you to select your description. That will then select or auto-populate the unit, so you just select a unit for that particular description, and then you add the values. Again, same with carbon. You add in your carbon data from a pop-up. There's the ability to be able to create essentially notes. They've called it log because that's what they're used to using, but it's essentially notes, and that will allow you to put notes against a work item. And then you have commissioning, which is your asset linking, so linking an asset to a physical location, and that's where the bulk of our work is around understanding how much an asset costs to that particular functional location now. And so when they put a cost next to this work item, they'll automatically know that actually that asset is worth a certain amount of money. So it could have been worth £100,000. You've just done some refreshing of that particular pump. It's now cost for £50,000, and now it's worth £150,000. So that's where the whole thing links together. So overview just of a completed project, or a project that's in progress. Actually, you could have a whole load of work items within a project, and just as a quick navigation area, we've got a drop down that allows you to expand that particular work item and shows you information around that work item, and just the overview and the attributes that are available for it. We've also got a change log, so that allows you to put notes at a project level rather than a work item level. And then we've got a workflow, which just allows you to see who's done what when. And so that just breaks down into the different statuses that this application allows you to have. So there's 9 altogether, but you can see if returned for review, who returned it to you and when it was returned back. So just gives you a quick overview of that. Okay, so going into the workflow then. So once a contract partner's created a project and he's completed all his work items and all the attributes that go along with it, it goes off to the costing and modelling team for them to review. It then goes to the project manager for their review and authorization, and then finally the asset management team, who then signs it off and says, yes, you can get paid for this work. But along that way you have a lot of red routes, and so you can go back and forth, and this could go on for months, where the contract partner sends it to the costing modelling team. They then send it back for return for review. You got the project manager that could send it back at certain stages, and then the contract partner sends it back, and it could be going back and forth, and it's a very complex workflow. But this is just to show you an idea of the happy path, and then a path that might be very messy and could take months and months to go through. So what that could look like in real life then, so that's the workflow in general. What we try to do there is allow each user to have their own version of a dashboard. So the contract partner would have all of their statuses in their different types of colours. So you could have, if anything needed attention, it would be in red. In this instance, they'll all be in red. You've got the costing modelling team, who have, again, the same type of statuses and submitted for review, accepted, but they have an extra functionality that allows them to select which contract partner they want to see the data on. Again, the asset accountant would have a similar type of filtering, but they would have different statuses depending on at which journey they would be at. And then the project manager, again, a reduced version of those statuses, because they only need to action or prove things at certain stages. So that's your overview page. So in a real life scenario on submitting it and doing the workflow, if a contract partner submits it from their application, so this is the contract partner, submits it to the costing and modelling team. So as you can see, it's the same look and feel for the costing and modelling team, but they have actions to be able to return or submit to the next stage, which is the Yorkshire Water project manager. And at each one of these internal areas, so details, measures, carbon, they can accept and return at that stage as well. And that, on accepting of the details and measures, that would tick the asset data, for example. On returning that would cross out the asset data, and obviously it would go in back to the contract partner, and that would look like something like this. So the contract partner would have a returned item or work item. So you select on return for review, and so as you can see in this instance, you've got a returned project with multiple work items that are either in submitted or accepted, but because one of the work, or two of the work items in this case, are returned, the whole project has returned. So, but this indicates to you straight away which work items you need to work on, and the legacy system currently doesn't allow you to see this kind of detail. So it's really quick for the contract partner now to drill down into that work item and correct anything that needs to be corrected using their notes or using anything that's within that particular work item. Okay, so going into development then, so that was the full, well, a small part of how they use their system. We also created a style guide, so that allowed us just to rebrand it to the Yorkshire Water theme, and then we used a theme designer to do that. And then the agile methodology. So what we did was we created everything into sprints. So we had solution at the top, which would be creating the project itself. That would be sprint 1, and then what we did was we actually created all the screens that are needed for that particular sprint, so that developers knew what they were developing, and also people that were going to test knew what needed to be done and what actually happened when they clicked on a button. So every button it was sort of displayed in this sort of navigation. We then did work items as sprint 2, asset linking was sprint 3, and then we had a workflow sprint and a couple of other sprints that kind of broke down into those categories to finish off the overall solution. So the first one, we could then build this, test it, and have that shippable, and then create the work items, which would then be a separate section, and then we could tie them together, and that would create the solution and work items in one go. So that's how we developed it. So that just gives you an overview around a complex Fiori app that we developed using design thinking and in an agile build approach. So thank you for your time. I'll hand you over back to Christian and Kai.
Thanks a lot, Hitch. I think this was an awesome presentation about your project at Yorkshire Waters. Kai, what do you think about this case?
First of all, I think awesome presentation. I really like the visuals and the effort you spent into it, and I like the use case as well because it shows how complex things can be sometimes. I was doing a little review and also trying to explore different approaches how we could address this application. Let's have a look. First of all, why did we choose this application as a showcase? I think it's already a very well-designed application and it features a pretty complex use case, which allows us to also showcase how mature Fiori has become over time. Second, it gives me the opportunity to explore alternative designs based on different assumptions on how people will use this application. So I will go through those options and show you what that means in terms of design. But first, let's have a look at the application as it is designed right now and see what can be improved and what are things that we would consider as different in a different way, looking at it from a standard perspective. First of all, the overview page. We see that here in the overview page we use a lot of stack cards. Stack cards is one card type among multiple card types, and it offers especially the possibility to trigger actions out of the so-called object flow. But there are other cards that show also more details on the objects that are inside, which I would favor in this case. In addition, we see here two features that are not supported in the overview page as of today. One is the groups, so we have the inbooks and the all submitted project group headers. This is not possible. And we have the advanced search in the footer toolbar, which is also a feature that we don't support because we use the filter bar to filter the content of the overview page. The new projects list uses the master detail pattern, the split app. This is a pattern that we discontinue using in new applications in Fiori because it has a number of restrictions that became, well, a hurdle in new projects, and where we decided to go with a new layout, which is the so-called flexible column layout, which I will explain in a minute. So we create a new project. There are then the possibility to enter new work items here. Maybe just a minor remark. If we start with an empty list, there is also, first of all, there is a placeholder text that you can put there, which would say something like no work items created yet or so. But you could also use that to trigger the creation of a new work item, so really inviting the user to take action and guide him already from the beginning. Another thing that I see here is we're not using the object page really, but we're using the old page plus an object header. This has some disadvantages in terms of how the page behaves, how the header content always consumes space or scrolls out. So we definitely recommend using the object page or the dynamic page or the so-called semantic page, which is used to implement the dynamic page. Then we can create a new work item, which opens then the details of the work item in the right panel. One thing here is it looks a bit like a flexible column layout, but inside of the page, so only part of the page uses the flexible column layout, which is something that is not supported. Flexible column layout only contains individual pages, because those pages can be also rendered independently depending on the screen size and so on. So to achieve something like that, you would use the dynamic site content, something that I will show also in a minute. One thing here is the user now has to add attributes to detail out the project. This is done using a pop-up. Of course, there is a downside with a pop-up. Creating items with a pop-up means you have to click to open the pop-up, enter the data, save, and then you have to open a pop-up, enter the data, save, and so on. So kind of a lot of overhead, additional steps. One thing to overcome this is to already offer the action to save and next, so that you can go through a cycle of new items. But still you're operating in this kind of isolated dialogue. Can be helpful, can be also a bit in the way, especially if you're interested in additional information from the context. So another option here would be to offer an in-place edit, also something that I'm exploring in a minute. Here we see the open projects, like the whole master detail with the project details on the right-hand side with a lot of work items in there. And here again, it would be great to use an object page here with a dynamic page and the header title. What I really like is the visualization. So it's always good to visualize information, especially if it's something that's recurring. From my perspective, I'm not 100% sure about the usage of the comparison microchart, because the comparison microchart is a comparison. Here I'm not really comparing, I'm just showing a status. It works for this example, but it doesn't work in the master list, right? And of course we want to show similar visualizations wherever that information is revealed. So maybe there are alternative ways how this can be done. Oops. And finally, the work item list itself. There is a nice embedded expansion of the work item details in here. So you can expand the work item details. They reveal to the down there. But there's a problem with that, because you now have to scroll to see it. You don't have much space to really see things in a vertical axis, and to navigate from one item to the next actually is pretty cumbersome, right? So you have to collapse it again, go to the next item, expand it again, collapse it again, and so on. So this kind of stepping through items has become very difficult here. Also here, I think there are alternatives how this could be solved that I will discuss in a second. So this was just a quick walkthrough through the current application. I want now explore alternative options. First of all, I want to quickly discuss the overview page. The overview page, as we saw it in the original design, featured mainly the so-called stack cards. But as I mentioned at that point in time already, there are other card types that could be used here to already reveal details on individual projects, show the status there, give you a selection of those projects, and allow you directly to navigate to those projects. Could be the list card, the table card, different types of list cards. We also have the link card where you can navigate, where you can even be more condensed and show more options there. There are purposes where the stack card is really good. This is, for instance, for the new projects, because the new projects basically require the user to create now those new projects, to initialize them basically. If I click here, I can either navigate to the list of all projects, or I can open the so-called object stream, which looks like this, which shows a number of cards next to each other where you can directly trigger actions to create them, for instance. Clicking that create would bring you then to the details of that project and allow you to create that project now. Now looking into the structure of the application. As I mentioned initially, there are different ways how you can structure such an application depending on how people will use that application. And here we see the current design is a combination of a master detail split app and a kind of object page. It's not really an object page, but kind of an object page with an embedded master detail for the work items, the indirect work items, and so on, which is embedded into that page. This design choice leads to the user, having to decide whether he wants to look at the list and go through the list, and then if the item is found, then to go into the editing of that item. Of course, that also means that once I'm in the item, I have the full screen real estate to work on that item, see all the information. So it gives a very stable and very, very rich environment. So that's the one use case. So if people are really focusing on either of the two steps, this is a good choice. In other cases where you have people more moving in and out, using on the one hand side the list to navigate through projects, on the other hand side then to operate on individual projects, maybe stepping through those projects faster. An alternative option would be applicable, which is the flexible column layout. The flexible column layout basically reveals all the three levels of navigation on one screen. You can focus on them by expanding them, so it still gives you the option to focus on one step there. On the other hand, it allows you to also have an overview and walk through it very fast. That's why it's called flexible, because it's really flexible. So let me quickly walk through those two options and show you how they would look like. Option one. First of all, we have the project lists. We see here I use the work list floor plan, which allows me to switch between the different projects in the different states, because we know those projects go through a certain workflow, and I might be interested not only in projects of a certain state, but I might also want to look at projects in another state that I have at hand. The work list allows you to switch easily, gives you also an overview of the projects that are in the different states, so it gives you also a good overview of where you are with your work. And in addition, if you really want, or in case you want to focus on a certain area, for instance, today I'm only working on the projects in a certain area of the city or what, I could also add a filter bar on top that would allow me then to restrict all the projects to a certain area, for instance. So on the left-hand side, we see the list. We have a view switch up here. So basically, this is the whole toolbar from the list, from the left to the right. And the view switch allows you to switch from a split view into a full width table view. So you can decide whether you want to really just look at the project as such, or whether you want to have a preview of the project, which might be sufficient if you just review those projects, if you want to have some information, if you want to see whether things are where they need to be, and so on. So in this case, I have the list on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, I use the dynamic site content to embed like a small page with the most important information about the project. So this gives me a good understanding of where we are with the project, and I can from here also navigate by using the link into the project full page view. There are other ways how this could be revealed as well. So I could also use a tabbed UI for that, using also maybe a toolbar so I can trigger additional actions from here. So this is even closer to the design that we saw. One thing here, as I mentioned earlier, I would love to have a way to express the status of the items, of the projects and the items within those projects in one consistent way all across. Here I explored the Harvey ball microchart because the Harvey ball is pretty small and you can also embed it into a list. So you see the Harvey ball for the different aspects, asset, carbon, finance, for all the projects, and you see the completion status here. And of course, this would then be used also in the details going down. Now, when I select a project here, either I click on that link or I open it or maybe even edit it. That one, I have to better understand whether I even need to open it in a display-only mode. If I open it, I have already the fields available to edit. I have different tabs where I can switch between work items, indirect work items, general information, and I have a global save down here where I can save everything. I have the object page floor plan with a title, with a header toolbar where I could also edit the header information, and I have the content. I use the tabbed layout to get closer to what we saw in the original design and also to better embed the embedded master detail that I will show now. On the work items tab, I have now the same pattern as I had on the previous page where I have a list that could span the whole width, but that can also be split, again using a dynamic side content, and now could show the list of items on the left-hand side and the details on the work item on the right-hand side. And similar to what we saw in the initial design, you have some tabs in here where you can switch then between the different aspects and where you can edit them. The good thing about the object page actually is that you can collapse the header, so it can give you even more space to the content and allows you better access to editing. What I mentioned earlier, instead of using a dialog to add items or attributes, in this case, here talking about the meshes, you can offer a in-place edit experience here. So one option would be, so you show this drop-down, you select something that already sets the unit of measure, you just enter the value. And as soon as you set something here, a new line could appear, preparing the next step input. Alternatively, you could use the plus button to add additional lines and then you fill them in. Also a possibility. Definitely this will avoid this disruption in going into a dialogue, being displaced into a different environment, and it allows the user to also, change context, see whether there's similar information in different work items and so on, copy paste maybe, things like that. Here we see the carbon attributes, similar behavior, in-place editing, building up that list. What we see here, I tried a different visualization for the status of the different aspects, so asset, carbon, finance. I also tried to repeat this on this side, so asset, carbon, finance, so that that the user knows where is something that I need to do. Here I used just icons. From my perspective, this is very obvious, very easy to grasp. Here I still have the attributes. So in the end, I explored different options. I could not tell which is the best. This needs to be tested with the users. How much information do they need? How far are they getting what I want to express there? But just to show there are many options to accomplish this. This is the tab of the indirect work items. Same behavior here. We have the list, we have the details on the right, we have the possibility to switch between split view and table view. Perfect flexibility, everything in place. People don't have to navigate out. Now comes the flexible column layout. The flexible column layout has been designed to allow flexibility between those two use cases. So not forcing the user to decide whether I'm now looking across or digging into details, but allowing the user to basically seamlessly move back and forth in and out of an information hierarchy. So now looking at the same use case using flexible column layout. Here we don't need the split inside of the table because we can, as we see, pull in the detailed information just by selecting a line. So here again, work list, floor plan, the list of open projects, a visualization of the status. And if I now select a project, from the right moves in the project details. The list itself behaves responsively, so you can drop columns, you can wrap columns, whatever you want. And on the right-hand side, you have a full-fledged object page showing all the details of the project. If I want to focus on that project now, I can also expand that, which will push out the details at a master list, and you can from here on continue working just on this one. And in addition, it works on mobile just in the same fashion. What we see here also is I tried to use the object page with the header title, with actions in the header facets in the content area, which can scroll away, so collapse. And I tried to show how different types of visualizations for data points can be used instead of just using forms. So this is a regular form for the partner details. Here we have a list of attributes. To enumerate a list of attributes, maybe a list is also appropriate. And here we have some attributes that are more like KPIs. So I tried to feature those carbon attributes more like KPIs, showing the label and the field in bold. And below that, this is a long scrolling object page, we see the different work items and so on. Here we see the full object page with all sections. We have the details in data points. We have the work items as a list. We have the indirect work items as a list. We have the change log where I use the feed item or the feed instead of the timeline, because from my perspective it makes better use of the available space, and it also supports a conversational interaction, so you can also reply to statements from the previous point. The workflow I also would, at least on that page, restrict to the last workflow steps that have been accomplished, and then have a show all to show details of all the work lists with a filter or whatever. In case the work items or the indirect work items are too many, we have two options. We can, of course, instead of having a long scrolling object page, switch to a tabbed object page so that we have the different sections basically on different tabs. This will support then a long list of work items. Or we add a show all link down here, which then would navigate into a sub-page where you have all the work items in detail. This will be a bit more problematic in terms of the flexible column layout, because of course then we already add the third column. That's why I would avoid it in this case. Now, if we select a work item, the third column comes into play. So we see the original project list. We see now the details of one project with the work items. I select the work item, and now I see the details of the work item in the third column. And again, this is an object page with the same design choices as before, with a very consistent display of the status and all those things. Question would be here, do we even need the display mode only, or could we directly also use the edit mode? Again, you see here again the status, different option how this could be visualized. We see this starting in the edit mode directly. Possibility to enter information here and to have a global save on the work item. Again, for the new work item, we see here the full page with the different sections. Well, and that's already it. Well, we see basically depending on how people will use that application, we have plenty of design choices to make. Finally, the answer can only be given by the user themselves. But there's no way, nothing that should be in your way to just explore those different options and see how people work to ideally support them. I think if we look in the difference between option 1 and option 2, obviously there is a big advantage if I want to focusedly work on either the list or the details for option 1 because it gives a very stable environment. Everything is very clear, everything is very set. Whereas in option 2, we have more flexibility. The user can decide whether he wants to focus on a certain aspect or not. Option 2 is responsive, so you don't have to care whether that's then be used on a tablet or on a desktop, because it will just take care of that. And yes, it supports those different use cases out of the box. So again, I think what is important here is we want to understand how people work, to pick the right information architecture, the right floor plans, and you can be sure that Fiori offers you all the tools that you need to accomplish either of the two solutions. With that, I think this was a very interesting example of an application with a very complex use case and with many options to solve them. So really thank you for sharing that with us, and back to Christian.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Kai. I think it was great to see the different alternatives that you showed, how you can use the flexible column layout in this rather complex use case. So that was the showcase video for today. I hope you liked it. Stay tuned and we see us in our next Fiori Makers call. Thanks very much for being a Fiori Maker.